Hello everyone, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Oreos Master, or the Gumbies. I am a Frost Mage player, and I'm going to be doing a Spellsteal Remove Curse guide. I've done this for the past few seasons at the start of it, just kind of going over what dungeons have Spellsteals and Decurses in them, and which ones are useful for you to use or not. And so I will be using MDT to kind of go through all the dungeons. I'll go through them in order, and kind of talk about which ones are actually like required or you should be doing, and which ones like don't really matter a whole lot. So starting off, I'm going to be going with Priory of the Sacred Flame. In this dungeon, there are no decurses at all. There is one Spellsteal currently. There used to be two, but I think it ended up changing it in when it went live. But the current only Spellsteal that exists in this is Templar's Wrath. From Zealous Templars, and those are primarily in this area, which is the second boss area. And the Telos Templars do Templar's Wrath, which increases all damage done by 30% for 10 seconds. This is something that you can spellsteal, so if you are able to, I would spellsteal this. This is beneficial to your damage. That's really the only thing in this dungeon. There seems to be a Templar in most of the packs in this room, along with the one after the boss. So make sure you're on top of getting the Templar's Wrath spellstealed. After that, Cinderbrew Meadery. Cinderbrew Meadery has no decurses. Again, same with Priory. And there is one spellsteal, but it's not a very important one. It's Rejuvenating Honey from Flavor Scientists, so that'll be near the IPA boss, the brew boss, and it's going to be one of the mobs that's with all of the taste testers. The taste testers and the flavor scientists are the one that actually do that cast, and it's Rejuvenating Honey. If this does get off, this is something that you do want to try and spellsteal. It's not beneficial for you. It's basically just a heal over time. It does 5% every 2 seconds for 18 seconds. So it doesn't really give you a whole lot of value, but if they put it on a mob like one of the larger mobs, like the Careless Hobgoblins or whatever, it's pretty beneficial for you to spellsteal it off of, just so that they don't heal. That's the only one in this dungeon, is on the Flavor Scientists. After that is Darkflame Cleft. Darkflame Cleft has neither spellsteals or remove curses, so taking either of those in this dungeon are not needed at all. There's no mobs in this dungeon that have that at all. Obviously, in this dungeon, if the affixes come up where you need a decurse, that's helpful. But other than that, in this dungeon at its whole, there is no decurses or spellsteals in this entire dungeon. The next one will be the Rookery. There are two things in the Rookery. There's one decurse and one spellsteal. I think there's a second spellsteal, but I'm not sure if it's actually in live anymore. It used to be in PTR, but I won't go over that one because I haven't really seen it yet. The first spellsteal is Seeping Corruption, and that is by the Corrupted Oracles. So the Corrupted Oracles, this is the decurse. The Corrupted Oracles are in the area after the first boss. We are running to the second boss, and any of these Corrupted Oracles will put the decurse on you. It's the spell that it'll drop, basically circles underneath your feet, and you need to dispel it. It also does damage while they're while they have the decurse on them. So make sure you're dispelling that as soon as possible. And other than the Seeping Corruption decurse in this key, which the oracles are only in the second area, the next one is the Spellsteal in this, which is Lightning Infused in the first boss area. So once you kill the first trash pack and go to the first boss area, it seems that the Lightning Infused is on most of the groups that are on the corners of the room, and it's typically on the Rook Guards, or the Rook Guards. And it basically infuses them with lightning energy, increase their attack speed and casting speed. When I was spellstealing this, I didn't really see if I got the benefit myself. And it's not really a major thing to do, but obviously it will help your tank a little bit, especially if it's reducing their melee speed. And then some of the casters, the Thunderers, especially the ones in the corners, have them as well. Those would be beneficial for you to spellsteal, especially because they're the ones that do the casting, the Lightning Bolt cast. So make sure that you are spellstealing those as much as possible. It seems like it's really only in the corner groups, and it's only the Rook Guards in the corners, as well as the Thunderers. But it doesn't seem like... Sometimes some of the mobs in the other ones have it, but most of the time it's going to be every single group in the corners has it. Otherwise, just make sure you're checking to see if they actually have the Lightning Infused or not on them. But yeah. those are that's the Decurse. The Decurse is the Seeping Corruption, and the Spellsteal is the Lightning Infused, which the Lightning Infused increases the mob's attack speed and casting speed. I would prioritize doing it on the casters versus the ones that melee, but you can do it on all of them. The next dungeon after that will be Operation Floodgate, and Operation Floodgate has no decurses, but it does have one Spellsteal, and that Spellsteal is called Regenerative Elegy. That's from the Disturbed Kelp, which is right before you fight the third boss, Swamp Face, or I guess it would depend on what order you're going in, with Swamp Face. And it's these mobs right here, right before you spawn, that you have to kill in order for them to spawn. They will cast Restorative Elegy. It is something that's interruptible, so there's not a lot of times where it will actually get off. And it doesn't do a whole lot of healing when it does get off. I think on the 10 I did earlier, it was like 800,000 a second. So it's nice if you actually need to heal, but most of the time you won't be taking the damage yourself. It's mainly just to make sure that the enemies aren't healing themselves. So it is a little bit beneficial, just making sure the mobs die faster, but it's not a whole lot beneficial for you because you won't really be able to use the healing that much. And that's all there is in Operation Floodgate. After Operation Floodgate is the Motherlode. The Motherlode has no decurses at all, so again, you don't need decurse. There is one Spellsteal in this dungeon, at least that I found, and it's on the Stone Furies right before the Azarok boss, the Stone boss. And when you're pathing up to him, there's the Stone Furies on the path up, and they cast Tectonic Barrier. Now, Tectonic Barrier is something that's most likely going to be kicked in these instances. But if it doesn't get kicked, this is something that you can Spellsteal. It basically gives you a pretty hefty shield, which would be beneficial for you in terms of like defensive value. But there's nothing really offensive that you get from this. But this would be a beneficial spell for you to Spellsteal for defensive to get an extra just barrier or whatever. And that's the only Spellsteal that's in here, and I believe there's 3 Stone Furies, and that's only in this area right here. And now, after Motherlode will be Theater of Pain. This is the dungeon that seems to have the most amount of Spellsteals and remove curses for this season, and there is 2 of each. There's 2 curses that you need decurse for, and 2 Spellsteals. One of the Spellsteals is a lot more beneficial than the other, but both of the curses are pretty important for you to dispel. And all of those, all the important ones really, will be in the area by Kultharok, the Lich boss. But I'll go over the first one that's not really as important, and that's on the Battlefield Ritualist. It's an Unholy Fervor. It basically makes it so every time you melee, they will heal for 6% of their health. If this gets off, this is something you probably want to Spellsteal just to make sure that this mob isn't healing that much. But otherwise, as a mage, it's not really that useful for us because it only procs off of melee hits, so we're not going to be using our melee at all to hit people. We're obviously casting spells. So it's kind of just beneficial to make sure the mob doesn't heal, but not at all beneficial for us. And typically that cast really isn't going to be getting off anyways. Now, the 3 important ones, I will go over the Spellsteal first. The Spellsteal is the Bone Shield. And now the Bone Shield is off of the Bone Magus, I'm not sure exactly how to say that. But they start the battle with a Bone Shield on, and it basically has them at 50% health, and then their other 50% is this Bone Shield. So obviously this will scale with key level, but you want to be Spellstealing this Bone Shield off. It basically gives you a 50% shield, or at least 50% of what the Bone Magus shield was. It lasts 2 minutes, I believe, so you can actually bring it into like the bosses and things like that. This is something that you especially want to be Spellstealing, not only to kill the mobs faster, because it does 50% of their health in one global, but also it gives you the defensive value of having the Bone Shield yourself. Now you will get removed down to 50% as well, but obviously you're going to have the shield, so it's kind of a little bit of like a pro-con kind of thing there, but I would always Spellsteal this Bone Shield. Let your group know this too, because you'll get the defensive value from this, but you'll also make sure that these mobs start out at 50% health instead of 100%. So this is like almost a mandatory one for you to do. And then for the decurses, there's 2 decurses. It is the Shadow Vulnerability, and that's from the Portal Guardians, which are the ones that do the AoE. And there are 2 Portal Guardians in this. The first one, before the first portal you take, and then depending on the routes you take, there'll be a second one. And they do a Shadow Vulnerability, which is it'll inflict shadow damage, but then it also increases the shadow damage taken. This is especially important for you to dispel before the AoE goes off, the Soul Storm. So you need to be on top of actually dispelling this or not. So this is a very important one. Otherwise, anybody who has this vulnerability on them will be taking a lot of damage during the AoE. So that's a high priority. And the next one is the Curse of Desolation, and that will be on the Nefarious Darkspeaker, which would be in the last portal that you take. It's any of the ones that do the Death Winds that you have to dodge. It's also there could also be a group where 2 of them, but this Curse of Desolation will drop little pools on the ground underneath your feet, and it also does ticking damage. So you need to make sure that you're actually dispelling this. It's very annoying, especially on the crowded platform like the last one that you're going to be on. If you have all the pools on the ground, and it's kind of hard to dodge at the same time the winds are going off. So this is going to be another high priority for you to dispel. So again, in this dungeon, there are the 2 spell steals, the Unholy Fervor, which isn't really that required, and then the Bone Shield on the Bone Mages, which is very important for you to spell steal. And then the curses are also important from the Portal Guardian, the Shadow Vulnerability, which increases shadow damage taken, and then the Nefarious Darkspeaker, which drops the little pools on the ground that you have to dodge. And so those are 2 pretty high priority dispels. After that, we're going to go on to the last dungeon, Mechagon Workshop, which again has no decurses, which seems to be a pretty common theme, I guess, in this season. There's not a whole lot of decurses going on in these dungeons, but there are 2 spell steals. They are kind of faster spell steals, like they go away pretty quickly, but it'll be Overclock, which is cast by the Mechagon Mechanics, and this will increase your haste by 20% for 8 seconds. So this is a kind of a nice damage gain, but not entirely as big as like the Templar Wrath in Priory, but it's obviously it's a little beneficial. And then the second spell steal is Defensive Countermeasure, which is a shield, and this is on the defense bot Mech 3s. So there's one on the path going to the last boss, and then there's one pathing up to the in the group over when you're after this first boss or after the dog boss. There will be a defense bot 3 in the second set of ads, and it's basically just a shield that you can spell steal. The shield does get broken pretty quickly if it's on the enemy, so you need to be kind of aware of when the cast is actually going to go off if you want to use it as your own kind of defensive. But otherwise, the shield almost like immediately gets destroyed. But otherwise, so it's only 2 spell steals, which is Overclock, which is a 20% haste from the Mechanics, and which are in this pack right before the third boss, and then the Defensive Countermeasure, which is a shield, and that's on the defense bot 3s, which there are quite a bit of those. There's 3 of them in the last area right before the last boss, or 4 of them actually, and then there's at least 1 more in the second set of ads after the dog boss, after Cujo. Yeah, I'll go do like a brief recap of all of them, which dungeons you need what for. There's really only 2 dungeons that you need a decurse for, and that's Theater of Pain and the Rookery, and they are pretty high priority dispels. So Theater of Pain, like I said, the Shadow Vulnerability and the Curse of Desolation, and then the Rookery has the Seeping Corruption from the Oracles. Those are the only 2 that you need the decurses from. Spellsteal is a little bit more prevalent this season. It's not as big as previous seasons, but there are a few ones that are beneficial. So Priory, you have the Templar's Wrath, which is the 30% damage, which is a nice buff to gain, obviously. Cinderbrew Meadery is just to steal the 5% healing over time on the Rejuvenating Honey. The Darkflame Cleft has nothing. The Rookery has the Lightning Infused on all of the mobs, basically in the first boss area. Operation Floodgate, again, has kind of one that's not really necessary. It'll be interrupted anyways, but the Restorative Algae. Then MOTHERLODE has the Barrier, which most likely these will be getting interrupted, but if not, you can spell steal it for a shield. Theater of Pain has has one that's pretty important and one that doesn't really matter a whole lot, the Unholy Fervor on the Ritualist, and then the Bone Magus shields. And then Workshop has the Overclock and the Defensive Countermeasure. So there's really only 2 of them that bring a offensive value, and that's the Templar's Wrath in Priory and the Overclock in Workshop. All the other ones are defensive values, so that you'll get defensive value from the Workshop, you'll get defensive value from Motherlode with the Tectonic Barrier from the Stone Furies, and you'll get defensive value from the Bone Shield. And then the healing ones will be the ones in Meadery and Floodgate. Other than that, Decurse is really only brought in 2 keys. They are pretty important in those keys, but other than that, you don't need them in any other keys. And then Spellsteal is pretty good in Priory and Theater of Pain. And then Rookery helps with damage modification, but otherwise, they're not entirely as important this season as they have been in previous seasons. But this is the list of all of the Spellsteals and the remove curses for Season 2 of The War Within. I'm sure I probably forgot 1 or 2 of them that's not really that important, or one that I'm just completely forgetting about, or I just haven't seen yet. But yeah, that is all for the Spellsteals and Decurses in Season 2 of The War Within. Thank you guys for tuning in.